Hi, I'm Don Wagner, President of eData Law Group, and today we're going to spend some time sharing with you the ways in which we believe it is helpful to think about the electronic or digital devices that we use in society, a way to think about those devices so that we can determine which devices might be useful to have us look at, because those devices might tell us something about either an investigation, they might tell us something about a way an employee worked, they might tell us something about what happened to a student, they might tell us something about what happened at the work environment. Those devices are in effect witnesses, and part of this podcast is to help communicate to you the manner in which you too can open your eyes and begin to see that you live in an environment today in which we are surrounded by, we are embedded in an environment in which there are thousands and thousands and thousands of digital devices looking at us and interacting with us every day. And those devices frequently are very excellent witnesses, and they can help us prove things to save our freedom in some cases, to save our companies in some cases, and to save our reputations, etc. So let's take a look at how this might occur. We, eData Law Group, breaks up the work that we do into two sections. We have a non-forensic section called Digital Safety Group, and that will be the subject of some subsequent podcasts where the DSG group, they deal in insulating, managing, and reporting the way in which devices are used to help keep people safe and basically to get you on an island where you don't see all the nonsense going on. But my group, the forensic group, we investigate, identify, and we confront, with the objective being that we either confront through litigation or we confront by working with your attorneys or working with your company or working with your supervisors, in effect to come up with a strategy in which the information that we take from the digital devices that are important in a matter, that information is converted into strategies and objectives that we then help you achieve. So we're going to be taking a look today at the forensic side, and we're going to be taking a look at how it is to think about the electronic devices of the world. How do we investigate, identify, and confront? And basically, what we've got is a worldview that says back in the day, before digital devices became so frequent, before we all had cell phones and we all fell in love with these wonderful devices, back in the day, most of the time, we intersect with people when we try to determine what happened. And we still do a lot of that today. We still figure out that if something occurs, one of our instinctual ways in which we try to gain information is to identify who saw something, who heard something, who was on duty, who was in the office at that time. So we begin to identify a group of people that were present, and by identifying those people, we have the intention of thinking we're going to interview those people. And we interview each person, we take notes, we begin to create a timeline of what happened, who saw things that happened, and ultimately that evidence leads us to people and transactions and communications of interest. Some of this paradigm changed dramatically when humans began using devices. When humans began using cell phones, as an example, we found that the cell phones themselves were very, very helpful because the phones contained information in the phone about when phone calls were made. Many times the phone contained copies of instant messages, etc. So the phone itself, the device that the human was using, that device itself became an excellent witness in addition to the human. And sometimes the device was a better witness. The device doesn't lie as much as a human does. The device isn't as manipulative as a human is. So we have people, and we have the devices that the people actually use. And when they use a device, we know that some people use devices when they put it in their hand. So we have the concept, a worldview, we have people, we have devices, and we have devices that the people know they're using. We know they're using certain devices because they got their hands on it, or they're typing on a keyboard, as an example. However, in a digital world, devices are connected to other devices, or devices use other devices to accomplish a certain functionality. And so many times the people, when they're using one device, unknowingly are using lots of other devices. They may be connected to a cloud. They may be connected to a group of servers. They may be connected to a tower. And these devices also contain information. These devices are also digital devices working within a digital world that capture information to do their job. And these devices may indeed also become really expert witnesses or great witnesses. As an example, I was recently involved in a triple homicide case in which defendants, humans, allegedly used devices, cell phones, to connect to cloud services, let's say maybe like Instagram or Pinterest or Facebook or whatever. So they were connecting to servers and they exchanging information, but when they used the phone to exchange information, let's say they were sending messages, etc. So the towers they were using at the same time also had information about the location of those cell phones. So if you think about that, we have a human intersecting intentionally with a handful of devices, but unknowingly intersecting with all kinds of other devices, cell towers, etc. And when one then begins to gather information from these other sources, one begins to build a timeline and begins to understand how these devices were used. And most of the time, the humans, they don't even know how the device is used. They don't even know how the device works, much less how the other devices, such as the cell towers or servers, work. And the reason that is that we love our devices. We love our devices so much that we want what the device does for us, and we don't care that we don't know how it works. And the simple matter of proof is every one of you has a device that has a delete button in it. You have a phone that deletes things. You have a computer that deletes things. And today, we kind of make fun of anybody who might say, well, doesn't delete mean delete? And of course, we know that delete doesn't mean delete. You hit the delete button, it doesn't go away. We know that now. And we know that some people used to believe that delete meant delete. And in fact, those people were quite surprised. Some of them were quite surprised as they lost their liberty and went to prison because delete didn't mean delete. But even though you and I know delete doesn't mean delete, most people continue to use the device even though there's a delete button or delete icon on the device, and you know as a human hitting it is not deleting the content. And yet we still use it. It's a wonderful dichotomy. It's a wonderful observation that humans so much want the functionality. We want to be able to read news. We want to be able to text messages to one another and be able to watch movies and to listen to albums, etc. We want that so much that even though the device contains, such as the word delete, contains information, we don't care that that information is not necessarily accurate. So what does that mean? Well, that means that not only are the devices wonderful witnesses, but it also means that humans sometimes use devices and they don't know what the device is doing. And number two, the marketing departments of most companies don't necessarily market the manner or the technology on how devices work. They don't hold up charts and tell you that this is a fascinating bridge system between chipsets on a computer, etc. Instead, they market the functionality of the device, its sleekness, its beauty, the manner in which it occurs so quickly. So let's see just how ubiquitous it may be that devices occur. And back in the day, a group of tourists, and by the way, every story that I tell you is either true or it comes from case law or it's been modified so to protect the innocent. It's been modified in such a way as to communicate to you a principle. But in Europe, you can ride the Eurorail by buying a Eurorail ticket. And you buy the ticket and you can go all around the different European countries. And that's kind of fun. Tourists do that all the time. And in this instance, there was a time when tourists bought a Eurorail ticket and they bought the ticket and then they went to use it, and the ticket did not work. The ticket didn't work. They then went to the police and they said, "Police, we bought this ticket and the ticket did not work." Now, and we've been defrauded. And if the police would have been the type of police that focused initially just on people and people and the documents that people create. If it were a people orientation, maybe the police could have said, well, let us set up a sting operation. If we're chasing the bad guys, we're trying to figure out who was it that sold you this counterfeit ticket. We could do a few things. We could establish a sting operation and send some officers out to maybe also purchase a ticket. We certainly could start by asking you, where did you buy the ticket? Who did you buy it from? And you know how tourists are. They say, well, we saw a person on the street and they had a little cart set up and they had some watches up and down one arm and they had a bunch of knives inside here and they had some CDs and some DVDs and they were selling Eurail tickets. And we were shocked when we bought the Eurail ticket to find out the Eurail ticket doesn't work. It's a counterfeit. Well, you can imagine if you approach this problem, the resources it would take in order to find the bad guys that sold the Eurail ticket would take some time to find. You'd have to commit a lot of time and money. It would take a long time, and the amount of damage from the Eurail ticket is relatively modest. So this is the type of crime that if occurred, maybe the policing agency is not too concerned, or if something like this occurs in your company even and something happens, you don't have the resources in order to investigate by hiring people, hiring a private investigation firm. Certainly this is not the kind of thing you want to hire a bunch of attorneys to come in and see what we can do about. So in our story though, the police, and I believe this was the Austrian police were particularly smart. The Austrian police knew that these Eurail tickets are kind of special. Special in the sense that when they are created with a color copier. That a color copier machine prints this ticket. And when a color copier machine prints this ticket, and this has been true since about before 2004, and it's been true up to about 2014 or 2015, it was universally true, when color copiers produced a ticket, the color copier put little dots on the ticket in a location on the ticket, usually the bottom left-hand corner, and they were little small dots. They were anti-counterfeiting dots that were created on the ticket through an international agreement of manufacturers designed to allow people to identify something about the document so that if money was counterfeited, if a copier was used to create paper money, counterfeit money, we could do something about finding the bad guys. And what they've done is they created these little dots. Now, in order for you to see these little dots, I have simply highlighted the little dots in yellow. So the little dots are printed on the ticket, they're highlighted in yellow for your observation, and the little dots are put on the ticket in a series of rows and columns, which when properly interpreted, give us the make, model, serial number of the copier that created the ticket and the date and time when the ticket was printed, or when the piece of paper printed. So in this instance, this particular example was printed on June 21st at 2005 at 12:50, almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the serial number of the copy machine that created it is also embedded in the ticket. And here's how you can see that. These dots can be viewed literally with about a 10 power, 20 power magnifying glass and shining a blue light flashlight through the copied document from the back and identifying where the tickets are. And this then, the ticket, the thing you held in your hand in our story, that's the best witness. That witness is screaming at people, but most people don't know it. That witness is saying, I know what I was printed on. I know the time and date I was printed, and most importantly, I know the serial number of the machine that printed me. Well, once you've got this information, it's real easy in order to track down the most important people that you're looking for. Who the heck made this counterfeit ticket? And indeed, once you know the serial number, make, and model of the machine, you can call the company. In this case, this was a Xerox this was a Xerox DocuColor printer. You can call the company and determine from the company who did they sell this machine to with this particular serial number, and then the Austrian police show up at this guy's house and knock on the door, ask him, do you still have this DocuColor printer? And collapse the counterfeiting ring relatively quickly and easily without the use of a lot of people, without the use of a lot of resources, because their eyes had been opened wide enough to appreciate that in a digital and electronic world, lots of things can be witnesses, not just humans. And in this case, the ticket going through the system copying system itself becomes this really great witness. And of course, the bad guys would not have perhaps used a copier if all copiers came with a big sign on them that said, danger warning, this copier prints things and will identify the serial number when that document is printed. And in fact, if you would like to read about the capability of printers to embed within documents information that helps us identify where the document came from, etc., you can go to the Electronic Freedom Frontier, EFF.org, and you will see on that website all kinds of white papers that interpreted these dots in a manner that they perceive to be a threat to privacy. So EFF.org, their view was these dots, they might be helping us catch bad guys, and they may be real important in your case, but they also represent a way in which machines that we use can be used to monitor and surveil what we do and how we do it in the machines we use to do it with. So that was embedded in, and the nice thing about this example is this nice example of how it is that the way in which a machine works can be used both for good and for not so good. It can be used to surveil people, and it can be also used to find out information that is absolutely necessary when we need them. So part of what we're trying to do today is to see if we can't open your eyes a little bit more and give you an idea of just how much junk there is in the world that could possibly be a witness or could possibly have information in it that's important. Most of the times that I'm called, whether by attorneys or by clients directly, I'm called to help that client find the persons of interest or transactions or communications of interest that lead us to somebody that's done something wrong. But the same type of information is many times used in order to determine business process efficiencies, in order to predict volumes of orders, etc. So the whole world of data analytics and the manner in which businesses use analytics many times start with information that's being captured by the use of devices by humans, and that capture information is important for me as a forensic expert to know. It's important for me to know how those devices work so that I can see that which the company doesn't see or that which the client doesn't see, and that is the devices that people use within this environment. Those devices contain lots of information. So as an example, if any of you have a device in your automobile that allows you to travel on the highways without having to stop at the toll booths, you may have a little box in the device, and that box contains a radio frequency identification device, an RFID, radio frequency identification device. And what an RFID does is it's a pretty neat type of device. An RFID, and by the way, you can see RFIDs if you want to go to most stores. RFIDs are used for asset inventory control by almost all of large retail box stores. If you go to a store sometime and buy something in a box, you take it home and hold the box up to the light, sometimes you'll see a square in the bottom of the box and it looks like it's lined in square. That's a little antenna with a little bitty chip in the center of it, in effect, and that is an RFID. And here's what RFIDs do. When a little bitty antenna walks through an electromagnetic field, this is back in the days of high school physics, if you take an antenna through an electromagnetic field, as it passes through the electromagnetic field, the interaction of the electromagnetic field and the composition of the antenna generate a very itty bitty bit of current. And in an RFID device, that little bit of current excites the little RFID chip, and the little RFID chip yells out a number. That's what RFIDs are. RFIDs are nothing more than a box or a device that when that device passes through an electromagnetic field generated by another device called an interpreter, when that device is passed through an interpreter, that device excites a little chip, and the little chip yells out a number, and guess what? There is near that interpreter a device that reads that number, sends it back to a computer system, and now we know that this device here passed through an interpreter, let's say at gate number 8 of the Ohio Turnpike system, and we know several things. We know the time and the date when this box passed through that gate. We know who the box belongs to in order to properly charge the account of the person for the toll associated with that event that had passed through that box. And when you then pass another exit, and to get off, you go through the same type of device. The RFID talks to an interpreter. The interpreter kicks back information directly to a computer, and we know that you were on the turnpike at, let's say, gate 5 at 9 o'clock in the morning. You were off the turnpike at gate 8 at 9:10. We know that gate 5 and gate 8 are 100 miles apart. It took you 10 minutes to go 100 miles. And we know that you were driving exceptionally fast. Now, believe it or not, the fact that we can take and mathematically know when you entered the turnpike and when you left the turnpike by reason of simply getting the log files associated with this particular device, there have been cases in which law enforcement has said, well, good grief. If I know you came on the turnpike at a certain time and I know you got off the turnpike at another time and I know that distance, you'd had to be doing 100 miles an hour. That's the only way this could be true. And so they would issue tickets in the mail, and of course, those tickets then were challenged in court. And we have case law that says for purposes of law enforcement, because a police officer didn't see that crime being committed, in many times those tickets are held to be invalid. However, I'm not law enforcement. And I'm not law enforcement, which means that in my case, I may want to know what happened here because we're using it for an investigative process or otherwise. So this is another fine example of how people buy this unit for its convenience. They whiz past things and they're not least bit concerned about the collateral ways in which the information that's being collected by that device can be used. Again, we're trying to open your eyes a little bit, give you an idea. RFIDs are so small. This is a little RFID. This is a human hair. RFIDs are so small that they're used all over the place. They're used in the military as an example. RFIDs can be scattered in fields and can be scattered in places. And as humans walk through these things, we pick up all kinds of information about the weight of vehicles and the number of humans, et cetera, going through a place. So RFIDs can be everywhere, and because they are so small, they are difficult to see. In your car, for example, you may have RFIDs embedded within the key or whatever, and Ford and other companies take and have this to now allow us to remotely control things on an automobile. We can, for example, and I like some of this stuff, it's pretty funny, you can set the maximum speed of the car. You can set the volume control. We have some instances where the radio won't even turn on unless the seat belts are buckled. That's kind of neat. And in other features in which we are using RFIDs and information generated by the automobile for a good purpose, to keep people safe. However, this automobile has got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of sensors in it. It's got lots and lots and lots of computers in it. Back in the day, before the computerization of the automobile, most of the time your backyard mechanics and others would try to fix a car by opening up the hood and looking inside and doing some tests and listening and to the way the engine was running. Now we all kind of know there's at least one computer in the car we're familiar with, and that's that little diagnostic port that's usually down by your left knee or whatever, and you plug in the little computer, you go to AutoZone or one of the other stores, they plug in a little reader, it reads out a code, and the code tells us what's going on in the car. But accident reconstructionists, fatal accidents at railroad crossings. Back, when I began doing this almost 20 years ago, some of my first clients were attorneys that were trying to help people to determine what happened in a railroad engine automobile collision, in which unfortunately nobody in the automobile survived. So there were no witnesses, there were no human witnesses other than the engineer. Now we know on the locomotive side of the engineer, we know we got a human that's in there, but we know that there are multi-track systems on the locomotive that are tracking all kinds of stuff. The speed of the locomotive, when the locomotive sounds its alarm, the decibel levels of the alarm, when they hit the brakes, on and on and on. But in the car, in order to make the car run properly, as we've moved from air-aspirated non-computer cars to cars that have got more than one computer in them, in order to make this car work, all kinds of stuff has to be captured. We got to know the position of the gas pedal. We got to know the rotations of the drive shaft. We've got to know the difference between the rotations of the drive shaft and the spinning of the wheels to determine whether or not you're slipping. You sometimes see that in a car where you've got that little funny car symbol with the little squiggly lines behind it, that's the symbol where the computer says, I detect the fact that the drive shaft's moving faster than the wheels are turning. You must be spinning, or excuse me, you must be losing traction, or we're on ice, or what have you. And it adjusts things. So in order to run the car now, we've basically given over to a series of computers a whole lot of information and a whole lot of sensors, which information and sensors, some of it is logged and kept for a while. Now, in order to run the car, you only need to keep a little bit of information. You run the car for a little bit of information, and maybe maybe the computer running the car doesn't really care how the car was doing an hour ago or even 10 days ago. But you can hook up to those diagnostic ports, and some insurance companies do that, and I might have a picture of that coming up, but you can hook up to those diagnostic ports a little device that captures information and that can record the time and the dates when you're running your car, how fast you're driving, what time you're driving the car. So if you're driving the car even properly at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night to Saturday morning, that may tell an insurance company something about your lifestyle that they may find interesting. I would like to know that perhaps for investigative purposes, whether or not that makes some sense. And so one way to obtain that information is to determine, does the car keep the information that long, or do I need to install something in the car, such as one of those devices installed by an insurance company? And if that's in there already, can we get access to that device? Can we read the information right from the device, or do we have to go to the insurance company? Is that information proprietary, et cetera, et cetera? The point being, again, as you open your eyes, driving the car, suddenly now the car and the components of the car and the way in which the car normally operates becomes this fantastic source of information for other purposes as well. Ford and others are moving beyond just the operation of the car to include when you put stuff in the car. There's all kinds of things in the construction industry to make certain that you don't leave tools behind or what have you. And some of these are based on RFID technology that allows us to know when tools are back in the car and when they're not. There's an example that I was just talking about before of the attaching a component to the automobile in order to get an idea of what the automobile is doing, and then at least in the insurance model, if you give us some information about your driving habits, we'll give you a break on your driving record, et cetera. But that piece of information may be indeed valuable for lots of other reasons as well. Medicine, telemedicine, it's exploded with devices that do two things. They certainly help us in the practice of medicine. They help the patients, but those devices themselves many times are the best witness of recording what the heck happened. Somebody dies in a heart monitoring ICU. Well, that whole ICU many times is using devices that use Bluetooth technology or otherwise in order to monitor hearts. And as soon as you monitor stuff, we've got alarm systems that go off if your heartbeat changes or what have you. And so if somebody dies in a heart unit and the humans go, wow, we never had an alarm, the first thing somebody should be thinking about is, well, now wait a minute. I know the humans are over here. We'll talk to them in a moment. But what is true about the environment this person's in? What's true about the bed they're hooked up to? What's true about the blood supply? What's true about these things that are hooked to them? What does that thing do? What technology does it use? Does it Bluetooth to something else? What is the data that's being extracted? And not just being extracted for purposes of healthcare. What data is being extracted in order for it to run? In the same way that you and I might not care that a computer is trying to keep track of how many revolutions there are on a drive shaft or the exact position of the accelerator or the throttle in an engine, we may not care in order to drive it. And maybe a report would say, well, here's how fast you were going, but what we really want to know is what was the exact position of the throttle in inches or degrees or what have you. So as we open our eyes, we can see, all right, there's a device. The device is performing certain functions. There may be reports associated with those functions that are focusing us on giving us information related to the function, but there may be all kinds of other information as well. And indeed, the FDA, if you want to read some really fun stuff here, the FDA has got a whole number of articles written about devices that use modems or wirelessly connect to modems in order to transfer information from the patient to the doctor through the modem, through the internet. And that device, such as a pacemaker. Pacemakers can be set up now so that when you lay down in bed, the pacemaker connects to a modem, and the modem connects to a hospital, and a technician at a hospital or at a doctor's office can see what the pacemaker is doing. And guess what? If there needs to be an adjustment, you don't need to go into the doctor's office. You don't need to drive there. We can make the adjustment to the pacemaker remotely from the office through the modem directly to the pacemaker. Well, that's pretty exciting. However, is this information encrypted? Is this information safe? Can anybody hack into that information? And if you ever want to read some fun stuff, read about the FDA's white papers dealing with the security of Bluetooth or the security of remote or wireless devices in the medical field. That's a real concern people have got. In the meantime, from our point of view, knowing again that there are devices or there are in the environment in which a particular individual is at, those devices may have information, certainly including medical devices, is really, really, really important. And by the way, one of the nice things about being able to check the status of a device remotely is, again, you don't have to come back in to the hospital, and we don't have patients coming back to the emergency room believing they're in some kind of distress or very, very concerned when indeed they are not. That can all be taken care of ahead of time. Blood. I like this one. Blood. There apparently are times when you can be very, very badly hurt if blood has become, blood has deteriorated due to temperature. So how do we determine the temperature of the blood? Well, again, if you're using humans, you could say, well, the blood arrived in a container. The container was refrigerated, went right into the refrigerator, on and on and on. You could line up the humans left and right, all of whom are going to testify about what they recall from the events that happened, but many times they're talking about something that happened a month ago or 2 months ago, and their recollection is not going to be that good. But blood bags, the blood has labels, and many of the labels have RFIDs embedded in them, where the RFID measures and logs the temperature of the blood. We can know the temperature of the blood by looking at the label on the, by interrogating the label on the blood bag itself. Again, that means if something goes wrong and you are responsible for preserving all of the witnesses, you tell all the nurses or doctors or whatever, or the EMS guys, okay, now everybody write down your notes and don't talk to anything about this, or you're doing an investigation and some kind of blood issue shows up, somebody ought to be smart enough to know and save the blood label at all costs. And are there ways we want to save that blood label so we can then still interrogate the RFID going forward? Now we begin to talk about the area in which I practice all the time and in which eData Law Group assists people, because now we've moved from an area where, as an attorney, I can see what the legal issues are. One's approximate cause and liability and who did what. I can see what we've done traditionally in the area of investigation and the practice of law, dealing with people, asking them what they saw, dealing with the papers, give me your logs, etc. But now I can see that our practice expands into what is true about the digital world that we're in, and in this case, that's one of the examples. Is the blood bag. Checking whether or not tasks have been performed in order to make certain that we've done everything that needs to be done, and these are all over the place, everything from checking the louvers on air conditioning systems in airports to make sure they've been cleaned, throughout all kinds of different events. RFIDs and digital technology is being used to make certain that tasks are being performed by people at particular times and dates. When something goes wrong, then I rush to the digital monitoring equipment or the digital equipment that tells us this business information, and then I determine, is there more here than just business information with a check mark? Yes, it got done, not sure what day it was. Generally speaking, going back to the car, in order for digital environments to work, they got to capture a lot of information. In order for you to use the information, generally speaking, you're only interested in a subset of that information. So I give you some information. The smartest practitioners, the smartest clients, the smartest humans are those that understand that I need to know enough about the device itself to determine, is there more here than what I'm getting from just a report? And of course, I got to be smart enough to see that the device is important even to start with. Remote access has become a big deal during the pandemic. thousands of different things pop up immediately when you think about remote access in terms of what needs to be protected, how are these systems working, what's the environment like of a human sitting at home using a laptop to connect to a company and doing work. How do they connect? It's the laptop is doing something, it's connecting to the home router. Is the laptop their laptop or was it given to them by the company? If it's their laptop, what's on that laptop? What have they been doing on that laptop? Maybe that laptop is loaded with malware. In any event, that laptop, how does it go through the router? How does it get to the company? Does the company have a router? Sure it does. Does the company have servers? Absolutely. How do we prevent wrongful access to the company? How do we protect the company's network? How do we protect the assets on the local computer, if any? How do we protect the assets in the company? Ask all those questions and what you'll get, like the car, is here's how the environment works to protect the company's assets and to empower you to be able to access the networks while at home. That's what the environment is built for. That's true. However, within that same environment, the same devices that are being used to protect the systems must necessarily log you in. They must necessarily know the time and the date. Suddenly, those same devices, those same applications become productivity measurements. Office 365, for example, has moved in that direction too. Productivity measurements mean I need to know when you're on my system, I need to know what you're doing when you're on my system, how long you took, and are you working? Are you working? And when we see articles like this that says that 40% of employees spend time browsing Facebook, et cetera, while working, well, what does that mean if that's what you're doing at home while you're connected to a law firm or while you're connected to a company? So the environment that's created for the purpose of giving you that access and monitoring business is the same environment that allows us to explore things like wrongful termination, theft of trade secrets, people who decide that they're going to form competing companies, who take information and run with it, and who improperly download information or improperly download and use information they have the right to access, et cetera, et cetera. So the machines in those instances, generally speaking, are the best and sometimes the only witnesses in which we can turn to. So tracking people in the workplace is absolutely essential in some instances. You know the little cards that identification tags people wear with the little information on them? You put an RFID in that card. You put an interrogator inside inside the doorways. With an RFID in the car and an interrogator inside the doorways, we can know when it is that card hung around your neck, what doorway you pass through, when you pass through it, and what's the next doorway you pass through, et cetera. We can know where you're at all times. Now that's important many times for legitimate business needs. Years ago, I had an opportunity to help companies that built parts for Formula One racing cars. Their facility seemed to me more locked down and controlled than even the Pentagon. People not only had different colors of ID tags, but there were different hallways that they were allowed to be in and hallways they weren't allowed to be in. There were different doors that would open and other doors that would not open. Some people knew what they were working on. Generally, nobody knew exactly what they were working on. So I remember an engineer to this day telling me that the part that they were working on needed a coating, and all they were trying to do was to get a coating on the part of a certain thickness, but they had no idea what the part did in a Formula One car. And they did that because the competition is so stiff inside Formula One racing that it is important that that information doesn't leak out. So what you do, you distribute information and everybody stays within their own little lane. In order, therefore, to know who was doing what when they were doing it, they were monitoring people all over the place for a legitimate business purpose. People knew that. However, if something went wrong, that's where you would go to look at the information that was being obtained for this legitimate business purpose. That's where you'd go to look to find information about where was John, what were they doing at a particular time. Agriculture uses this all the time. RFIDs are being used to determine whether or not crops, down to the plant level, have been properly trimmed, pruned, watered, fertilized, etc. Crop yields have been dramatically increased in size and in the health of the field by, in effect, being able now to administer pesticide and fertilizers at the plant level. And all that is measured basically through devices that measure humidity and temperature and what's going on with what plant where, etc. They also use GPS and geolocation satellites to determine where the plant's at and what they're doing on a particular plant, all of which is a legitimate agricultural purpose, all of which also, again, tells us when we open our eyes, good grief, these people are working within a monitoring environment in which all their activity is being monitored and surveilled for a purpose of making sure the plants are good, but at the same time, that's the environment in which we are working all the time. I mentioned before air vents in airports. They need to be cleaned, and they need to be cleaned at a regular service. Guess what? There are services out there now. There's a client that about 10 years ago came to me, and they wanted to get in the business of being able to remotely know when does my salesperson, when does my repair person show up at an HVAC system? How do I know they did the HVAC work, et cetera? All that can be done remotely. We can know that you're on site. We can know what you've repaired. We can know when you've left the site, and we can log all that information in such a way that when somebody has a problem, we can prove that we didn't cause the problem. But at the same time, that same legitimate business interest then becomes a surveillance interest and a productivity interest when you're trying to figure out, are people working, or more importantly, are they doing something that they shouldn't be doing? All of you that may have passports, you should know that passports back in the day all have embedded RFIDs in them. But when they first came out, the little passport RFID, when the little chip in the RFID yelled out the number that I was talking to you about, that number was in, quote, plain text, meaning the systems were not configured to encrypt that number. So sure enough, and you can go, I believe this was up on YouTube at some point in time, and this is back in 2009, so this has been corrected since then, but it's still a fun thing to go back on YouTube and take a look at. Knowing that what an RFID does, and knowing that you need an antenna in order to find the RFID, this guy built himself a little antenna. There's his computer. And this is the antenna, this square thing up here. And he drove around, I believe it was San Francisco, and he managed to capture a bunch of little RFIDs yelling out as he just drove the streets of San Francisco, and he managed to be able to, and he said, well, I got like 100 hits, and on those 100 hits I was able to find 5 numbers, and he could actually read the numbers. Now that's all he could capture from the RFID is the number, because we didn't have the back-end computer system to tell us much more. But you can imagine how fascinating that is, that we knew that there was a passport with an identifiable number, and if we were conducting some type of surveillance or some type of investigation that required us to get to the back-end computer system in which the number was connected to a human, we would know the exact time, date, and presence of that human at any one time simply because we knew where their passport was. And of course, whenever there is the opportunity to take information, there's an opportunity to protect it. This is a little bit like what I do forensically, and this is a little bit like what DSG does to help people out. You can buy a wallet for not only your passport, but your credit cards that prevents the RFID, the electromagnetic waves from getting through and being able to read your cards. So here we got a little entrepreneur that built himself a wallet, indicating that we can prevent this from occurring. RFIDs are being used to help people determine in cancer centers, to help people end up with better experiences in cancer treatment. And for example, in a Disney center, the RFID is embedded in your ID tag. When you come into the center and you go through the interrogator at the front door, that RFID yells out to the front door interrogator, embedded in the front door, here's a number, back-end computer system goes, oh, this is Don Walkner, shoves that information right up to the front concierge, whack, in the front concierge, sitting by the desk is a little screen, and up comes my picture, and up comes my schedule, and who I'm supposed to be seeing today, and there's a person there that can look up and look down and see, yep, this really is Don Walkner, he's here for some kind of cancer treatment, he's going to go to room 21A, go to room 21A, walk through the door, bam, the lighting system, the songs that I want, the music that I would like, the temperature of the room, because I've been here before for radiation or whatever, that's all pre-set up. Set up because the system reads who I am and knows what I would like. That RFID system, again, is presented to you in part of this seminar simply to get you to open your eyes as to the tremendous number of devices with which we interact all the time. Perhaps one of the most fun one is RFIDs that are embedded within wrist devices, wrist identification devices within hospitals. Those RFIDs, in effect, yell out numbers all the time, so we know that where little babies are and where they're not supposed to be. So if granddad picks up a little baby and decides he wants to go down to the solarium and show the little baby off to other people who are waiting there, and he walks out of the nursery or walks out of the one department in order to hit the button to go towards the elevator, security doors close, men and women in suits show up because the RFID on the baby's ankle or the RFID on the baby's foot has basically talked to an interrogator and told them this is a baby moving through a system to a place they're not supposed to be, and we can react to that. And then I'm going to skip a couple here because one of the best ones is this. RFIDs for washing your hands. This is really, in my opinion, a fine example of the manner in which our digital systems allow us to use things that we don't know how they're working, but come and save us many times when something goes wrong or somebody accuses us of something. You can imagine that if you were in a hospital setting and you were treating a patient and that patient developed a staph infection, and that patient then sues because they claim that your hospital's dirty. Well, in a lawsuit back in the day, one might try to say, how am I going to prove that my hospital is not dirty? How am I going to prove that everybody knows, wash your hands, that we keep the hospital clean, and that we take cleanliness seriously? What you could do is you could have the person in charge of education testify about here are the seminars once every 6 months that the hospital puts on about making sure you wash your hands. Here are the posters that are up in different places in the hospital. But if you were to call an individual doctor who treated a patient, no doctor in the right mind or no nurse in the right mind is going to be able to say, yes, I know I washed my hands every time that I treated patient A, B, and C. In fact, I remember Thursday, the water was quite cold. Well, give me a break. No, you have no credibility because you don't remember that. It's a ubiquitous action. Nobody is logging it. Aha. Except if you've got a specially designed soap dispenser in the room where you're supposed to wash your hands by the patient. And in the soap dispenser is an RFID that reads the RFID, or is an interrogator rather, that reads the RFID embedded in your ID. That RFID then says, standing before me is this person with ID number so-and-so. Back-end computer says that's Dr. Jones. And I am 80% full of soap. That's hit by an internal sensor. And the plunger to dispense soap has been hit 6 times. That's at this particular hour, 9:01.32. And from that, we build a log. And now we know. We have a log that Dr. So-and-so at a particular time that they say they were treating this patient, we now know that 3 seconds beforehand or a minute beforehand or half a minute beforehand, that same doctor did indeed wash their hands, and we know that and can prove it with a log system. I share that with you because when you enter a room now, hopefully you're looking around going, good grief, how many other things are in a room that I can see now could potentially be witnesses or help me if I had to prove something that, how the heck do you prove that you washed your hands 100 years ago, or excuse me, 100 months ago? In some of the future stuff, Alzheimer's patients, did they take their medication? We got an RFID for that. Take a pill, the pill actually talks to your cell phone, and we know that if the pill is not taken, we can give you an automatic call to remind you to take your medication. Same is true, some prescription bottles contain RFIDs on the bottle. The bottle gets brought near the cell phone, smartphone when you go to take the pill, and if people don't do that, they get a reminder generated to do so. So we're seeing even on some compliance issues. And then finally, in order to kind of open your eyes to some of this stuff here as well, gunshot detection equipment. Now that's caused a lot of interesting observation. Gunshot detection equipment is basically triangulation, pretty straightforward, in which we got sensors placed all over the place. And when a gunshot goes off, the sound waves of the gunshot going off hit the sensors. The sensors fire back information to a computer. The computer analyzes the wave, the sonic wave, can usually determine what kind of gunshot, how many shots, what kind of weapon was used. But because more than one sensor is used and we get triangulation, we can also determine where the shot was fired from, and then we can allocate resources, not only to the location where the shot was fired from, but allocate resources to prevent people fleeing that location through the most likely escape routes, highways, etc. So we end up creating a perimeter, and many times we catch bad guys fleeing the location. So that's pretty neat. These don't have to be embedded, these sensors don't have to be embedded on a post saying here's gunshot detector. They can be embedded in street lamps. And indeed, there are street lamp systems that include gunshot detection equipment. But that's led some people to ask the question, well, now wait a minute, do they only listen for gunshots, or can they listen for human voice as well? And there's been lots of great white papers written, and you can read them as well, about whether or not gunshot detection systems or violence detection systems indeed are being used or can be used to listen to conversations of people without their knowledge. And if law enforcement does that, that's a violation perhaps of their Fourth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. If private companies do that, that may be a violation of contract, and it may be a violation of privacy, but it will never be a violation of their constitutional rights usually, because, and I assume all attorneys know this, but sometimes clients don't, the U.S. Constitution governs your relationship with your government, not with your employer company. Your employer company's relationship and your privacy expectations there are governed by statutes, not by the Constitution. So gunshot detection systems are fascinating. You can read about them by going through the slide deck, by the way, will also be put up, or is also put up on the website. Also, white papers that accompany this are also going to be up on the website, so you're more than happy to walk through those. Some of you may even have smart meters, or may have read about the rollout of smart meters, where the smart meter system is a system that measures the draw of electricity at such a fine detectable level that the smart meter can measure the difference in the draw from your dishwasher and know it's different than the draw from your sewing machine, and measure that that's different than the draw from a refrigerator. And if all those things then are measured, one can look at the draws that are being used in your house at a particular time, and we can know whether or not you're washing dishes, are you washing clothing, and if there's a drought, we can even know whether or not you're violating drought regulations by, in effect, running the hot tub or heating the swimming pool, etc., during a time when you're not supposed to be doing that. So from the business operations side, smart meters allow electric companies to better manage load and to be able to offer you a deal. Meaning if you'll simply use your devices at times when the electrical load demand is low, like in the middle of the night, to do things, we can sell you electricity a little bit cheaper for those activities than when electricity is very, very expensive. On the flip side, though, those same smart meters and the information they are collecting, in effect, allow us to view a profile of what people are doing during a particular time and day. And in the very same way that maybe you have read, the utilization of water use has, in effect, been used to identify those people that are growing certain plants illegally, etc. Well, smart meters allow us to identify people that are using humongous amounts of electricity, or who are using electricity at odd times, or who are using electricity at times that contradict what they've said they were doing at that particular time and date. Again, this thing hanging on the side of a house then indeed may become an important witness. So in our next podcast, so this was a big 50,000 foot flyby. It was intended to make you sit back and go, good grief. In today's world, there's not one place you can go to, not in your house, not outside, not in your car, not in your place of work, not in a restaurant. There's probably not one place you can go to in which you are not encased in an environment in which there are thousands and thousands of electronic devices that you are either intentionally interacting with or you're interacting with without knowledge at all. And And none of that makes a whole lot of difference to us because we're getting the functionality we want. Food's getting served hot, we're having a nice time, we're enjoying a conversation. But when something happens, when it becomes important to investigate something, when it becomes important to identify things that have occurred for whatever reason, when it becomes important to try to investigate, is somebody planning to steal your computer information, steal your marketing information, when it becomes important for you to know, is someone trying to interfere with my productivity or interfere with my reputation or claim that I've done something that I didn't do or get me canceled. No matter whether you're on employer side, employee side, owner side, worker side, doesn't matter. In that environment, the purpose of this podcast was to get you started in just opening your eyes and seeing the tremendous amount of devices that exist and how it is those devices can potentially become witnesses. And then we're going to think a little bit more in the next podcast, not about an overview of all devices, but we're going to take a look at how the devices we use, like cell phones, etc., how they work and the type of information that we can get from them and why they make such great witnesses. And that will get you like a more of a detailed view on a device level. So I hope you have a good time enjoying this podcast. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.